Today, I wanted to take you through the 10 commandments of cyber hygiene. So I recently wrote the book on cybersecurity, and I had the fantastic opportunity to give a lecture to an MBA class. And while I prepared like a 2-hour sermon, this particular section, there was a lot of questions, more than anything I expected. And so I did want to spend a little bit of time today just going through those 10 commandments. I've got Liz here as my fellow presenter, who's going to ask some questions and interject when she can. So that gives you then an idea of, I'll give you the advice, and then Liz can see if it resonates with her or if she thinks, oh, this doesn't make sense to me. So these are the 10 commandments on cyber hygiene. And the first one, when you think of cybersecurity, is for every single website that you have, and there's Liz with her book, for every single website that you use, you should have a different password for each website. Now, this might be a little bit alarming or confusing for some people because passwords are kind of a pain. None of us like them. Even I don't like them. But I recognize the need to have a unique password for each website. And why? You're asking, why do I need this? This sounds like a headache. And the reason is because if you use the same username password, which is essentially like your key to a website, and use the same username password, if any of those websites get hacked, and those credentials, we call them credentials in cybersecurity, if any of those credentials get leaked to a hacker, then simply put, they can access all of your websites. You really don't want that. Liz, does that make sense? Does that resonate with you in any way?
Oh, definitely. But I have a lot of questions with regard to this because, so like I started to read your book and then that section really stood out to me because I thought, okay, damn, I'm really in trouble because I know for a lot of my social media passwords, I use the same kind of password. And sometimes I use like a variation of that. So actually just directly after I bought your book, I bought myself a very useful book, which is a password notebook.
Excellent. Excellent.
And so I started. It's like it's quite a lot of work. But I've started to sort of write in all the passwords that I have, and then try to make an effort to update them regularly.
Yeah.
But I mean, how can we make it more feasible? You know, because nowadays we have like 10,000 passwords, like to all sorts of things, and especially me that works in marketing and communication. I mean, we have all these different channels. Like maybe you've got some really useful tips
Yeah,
on making it more possible or feasible, I should say.
definitely. And there is sometimes a bit of a question mark around writing down your password. So I want to give you some advice there. It's not a bad idea to write down the password, but I would actually say don't write down the actual password. Write down a reminder to the password. The other thing you can do, which is one of the recommendations in the book, is you have your own password, something that you remember. What you can then do is insert the website somewhere in that password. So for example, Twitter, you can say Twitter as the start of your password plus your own password.
Okay.
You could put Twitter somewhere in the middle. So a little bit of your password, Twitter in the middle, the rest of your password, or the other way around, your password and Twitter at the end. This does two things. One is it makes your password longer, which you really want. And second, it makes it easy to remember. So essentially it's the same password then, but for Twitter, it's different. For Facebook, it's different. You just want to maybe be consistent, but this is what you can write down. So instead of your writing down your password, something that you remember normally, like your birth date or husband's name or whatever, don't write that down because if someone gets that book, then you're in trouble, but just write a reminder. So my normal password plus Twitter, my normal password plus. So you never actually write down the full password, but rather just part of it. So if you ever lose that book, so what? Let them have it. You can even post it online because it doesn't mean anything to anyone other than you, but you have to make sure you kind of hide, encrypt in old form that little passphrase that only you remember. Does that help, Liz? Does that
Yeah,
resonate?
that's a really useful tip.
Yeah.
And actually, like not to throw a spanner in the works, but like, what about like this two-step verification that you get?
Yes.
Because doesn't it
Well,
complicate things even more? I mean, I guess it's quite useful, but
yes.
yeah.
So this is the easy answer to that is that any website, any technology can and does get hacked. So you have to realize that firstly, and secondly, expect it. So two-factor authentication, which is actually the third tip, so we'll jump ahead to commandment 3, is enable two-factor authentication. So just to demystify that a little bit, when we say two-factor authentication, it means that you use a username, a password, so that's your first factor, and then the second factor is either a code that gets sent to your email address, a little code that gets sent to you on your phone, an SMS, or sometimes you have these tokens or authentication apps that generates a little a passphrase or a number normally. So
is that like the Google authentication
right,
or
yeah. So those are the authenticator apps. You get various. You get Okta, Google, Microsoft's got an authenticator. So there are various, and that gives you a second factor. So in the event that a website does get hacked, and again they do, then even in that instance, a hacker will try and log onto your account, and by the time they get to the second factor, they won't be able to get any further. So then they just won't hack your account. They'll go to all the other accounts that haven't enabled two-factor authentication. But this is a great question, and it is a pain in the you know what. It's not a nice user experience, but neither is having a key to your front door. I would love if I could just walk into my door, but I recognize the risk, and so I have a key for my front door and then another key for the other door, and these are the kind of things that we need to do to protect ourselves. So I recognize it's not necessarily convenient, but where possible, if you can enable two-factor authentication, do. But I would say this as bare minimum: definitely enable two-factor authentication on your email accounts, your social media accounts, and any financial, banking, government, medical type accounts. Bare minimum. Everything else doesn't matter. They probably won't have the ability to enable it anyway. But for those fundamentals, especially your email and your banking and your medical, you really do want to enable it when it's available. And more companies these days, in fact, I would argue most, do allow that functionality because they recognize the risk and they recognize that this helps people protect themselves.
Yeah, I was thinking about it as well because I know like a lot of marketers, well actually a lot of businesses in general use sites like that basically collect or store your passwords, like LastPass, for example.
Yes.
So and yeah, and I know also with iPhone, sometimes I get a thing that says it suggests some kind of complex password for me. Like, are those also useful? Like, do those help?
It's called the password manager, the ones you're referring to, and they're not bad. But the problem is, like anything, they can get hacked. And so
And
there
then
was
they have
actually,
access to everything.
yeah, so there was a recent hack on one of the password managers. I expect there'll be more hacks. So my advice is preferably not to do it.
Yeah.
But if you do, that's okay. It's better than nothing, but recognize the risk and then enable two-factor authentication anyway. Password managers are good from the perspective that they create strong passwords. So that's great because it's gobbledygook. And so that's good. And that's actually command number 2, is to create a strong password. And a strong password usually contains letters and numbers and a special character. So password managers are great at doing that. I would say if you follow the technique I gave you, then hopefully in your own password, you've got some of that complexity built in. And then if you have that in your own password plus the addition of the website that you're going to, then that should make a sufficiently long and complex password anyway. The next commandment number 4, is do not use public hotspots ever. Now this one, people must be thinking, why? You mad? It's free. It's free. It's wonderful. The problem is it's trivially easy for someone, a hacker, to go with a computer and a modem and create a Wi-Fi or hotspot in a Starbucks cafe. So they can go in, put their modem up, and suddenly you see, oh, look, free internet, free Starbucks internet, and you can log on, and that's great. But basically, they can then sniff all of that traffic, all of it. And if you then happen to accidentally or intentionally log on to a site where you have to put your username and password, then they will have gotten that username and password. So it's just not a good idea. You may be asking, but what if I go to a hotel, for example? Can't I trust that? I would say, again, it's a public Wi-Fi. Anyone else who is logged on also could be sniffing that traffic. That's the other thing to recognize. But what you can do is there is such a thing called a VPN, which is a virtual private network, and it's an application or tool, and I would recommend a paid version, but there are some free ones. But basically, it creates an encrypted tunnel. So if you have to use public Wi-Fi, then you have to use VPN. Absolutely, without question, and preferably a paid one from a reputable company. And that changes, so I don't have any particular ones to recommend, but that's something that I would then advise people to do. Next tip is reject all cookie requests. So this is an annoying one, actually, because most websites rely on cookies, and cookies are little snippets of code which basically stores certain information, like which sites you visited, what your preferences are. a bunch of information about you, data about yourself, basically, some of it personal data. And in the EU, since GDPR, we basically had a law where it's required to set these cookie policies. And there's actually some laws around that. And so if you're in Europe and you go to a website, every single website will ask you, do you accept the cookies? Do you accept the cookies? And I advise not to accept any of them. Now that sounds a bit extreme. So you think, why? Like, who cares? Big deal. But here's the reality. I checked one of the cookies. What are the permissions that I would allow if I said, yes, go ahead? And it's in the book. And what I found is that 75 vendors, data vendors, just with the letter A, 21 with the letter B, 20 with the letter C. And by the time I got down to D, I just stopped because it's hundreds. That means your data is being collected and sent to hundreds of data vendors. Now, if that's not frightening, then I'm not sure what is.
That's very, very scary. My gosh.
Yeah. But you can decline them. So it's a little bit extra effort, but I always decline. I always switch it all off and go for the minimum at all.
And then what do you just basically like a text-based website with very little data on that website? Or how does, because if you're declining, you can't have access to like certain things.
Some of the functionality is impaired, but most of the time they have different levels of cookies. So they'll have like functional cookie and then marketing and demographic, whatever. So there's different forms. Normally the bare minimum is functional so that the website functions correctly.
Okay, so that's a good one to pick, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's normally the bare minimum anyway. You can't decline that because then their website doesn't work. Then the next tip is cover your webcam when not in use. And this is for the simple reason that hackers try to get keystroke sniffers or webcam recorders onto machines of unsuspecting people. And then they take recordings of whatever's happening in front of the webcam. And if they then see people naked or anything like that, they'll use that to extort you. And so you really want to make sure when you're not using your webcam to cover it. Same on mobile devices. If you've got the ability to cover your webcam, you should. And you can buy these little gadgets, these little plastic things that you can use to cover them. I'd recommend that to anyone. And ultimately, if you have a device in your room and you don't need to be on the webcam, if you can't cover it, then switch the device off. So like your laptop, it doesn't have to be on the whole weekend as an example.
Definitely.
Commandment number 7 is do not download free or pirated software or media files from the internet. And the reason is because cyber criminals know that people love free stuff. They know that people like to download pirated stuff. And so what they do is they will put malware inside of it. So if you wonder how do key loggers get onto machines, how do webcam recorders get onto machines, it's people downloading free software. That's one of the ways. The other way is to go to a malicious website, for example. So hackers are incentivized to try and get people to download free stuff, which they can embed malware, or to go to websites, clicking on links that they shouldn't in order to put malware on. So that's something that's important. Don't download free. I know it's nice. It's my favorite flavor too, but not a good idea when it comes to software. The next tip is back up your data. Not all your data. I would say back up the important data. So not all of your data is equally important. If you just wrote a blog post, and you have it on your machine, but you then uploaded it to the internet, for example, then if you lose it tomorrow, who cares? But if you've got your wedding photos and you've got one copy, then do yourself a favor and back it up. You can back it up to a media device. That's one option. The other option is to put it into the cloud. So nowadays you have Apple's got a cloud, Google's got a cloud, Microsoft's got a cloud, and you can download your documents to one of those places. So that's great. So that means if your machine then gets hacked and you get malware on your machine and they encrypt all your files in order to try and get a ransom from you, then you can just simply reinstall the machine and all your data is in the cloud. The next commandment is do not use random USB sticks. So USB sticks and viruses for the longest of time were always spread through disks. So in the beginning, the old days, computers weren't connected on the internet. So the way criminals got viruses from one machine to another was to infect a disk, a removable media. Now, a USB stick is just a fancy version of the old disk that we used to have. And it's obviously got more storage, but it's just a fancy version of that. And hackers are very smart, and they use this to catch people, especially when they're trying to target senior people in a company, for example. They will put malware on a USB stick and then write something on it like, oh, you've got to see this. You won't believe what's on here. Is this you? These kind of enticing, scary messages, perhaps. And you won't believe And if you receive that in the post, you won't believe how many times people, especially with their curiosity, are like, ooh, must be for me, I'll plug it in. And that's the easiest way to get malware onto a computer. When you see a USB stick on the floor, when you get one in the post, when you get one from a company you don't trust, just don't plug it in. It's just not worth it. If they can't share their information online, on their website, through a legitimate channel, USB stick is the worst thing. And even if it's not intentional, their machine could be hacked. They've plugged the USB stick. Now it's got a virus. You plug it in, game over. Now you have a virus too. So don't plug USB sticks. One of the easiest ways to hack a company is to leave either USB sticks in a gift basket at the entrance or to drop them accidentally in the parking garage. You won't believe how many people plug them in because they're trying to be helpful, and I get that. But you've got to recognize when you're doing something potentially risky, like running across the motorway. Kind of risky, probably not a good idea to do. Same thing with a USB stick. There's a modern day extension on this, which I also wanted to briefly mention, and it's not covered in the book, but it's a new vector, is, you know, these QR codes that you see everywhere.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So now cyber criminals have realized that people are so inquisitive, they've figured out this new technology. So what they do now is put QR codes randomly in the streets. Oh, check this out. Oh, you won't believe what's here, in order to entice people to click on those QR codes. And when you click on a QR code, it is intending to send you to a particular address. Normally it shows you, so that's good. But don't go to any website that you don't recognize or trust. And therefore, the average QR code in the street in public, I wouldn't recommend. Obviously, this is not for if you go to a restaurant and the restaurant says our menu's on the QR code. Okay, fine. And then when you scan the QR code, you can see it's going to the restaurant's website. So that's okay. But random QR codes in public, on the street, on the floor, on the pole on the street, I would not click those. And that's just the modern day equivalent of the USB stick.
Very good to know. That's a great tip. I really didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a new one. So, and these things always change as well. That's the interesting part. And then the final commandment is use an antivirus program. Always, whether you have a Windows machine or an Apple machine, you should have a antivirus program, because antivirus programs help automatically detect whether there's a virus, and it'll typically block the virus, quarantine the file that's trying to infect your machine. But really a good idea to have. I often get asked the question, well, what about Mac? Isn't Mac more secure? Well, not really. In the past, it was a fair argument because Windows machines were disproportionately being hacked because they were most widely used and hackers like the root of least resistance. But nowadays, Apple Mac computers have become almost as prominent, and so I would say the risk has become almost the same, if not the same, pretty close. Enough that it's highly advisable to have an antivirus program. So I would definitely recommend that.
Right, that's really good to know. I think a lot of people that I know that use Macs don't even know this. So I
Yeah,
definitely think that's a great tip.
yeah, exactly. So those are my 10 tips. They are contained in my book. If you would like to learn about cybersecurity, if you would like the topic demystified, it is in my book. The book's available on Amazon. I'll also leave the links. Thank you for watching. I hope these tips were useful to you. Also, if you go to bookoncybersecurity.com, that's my website, and I've got some free tips, including this list, available for you. Again, I'll leave it in the link below. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.